So welcome everybody. It's great to see you all tonight, and I want to do a special welcome to the people that are attending tonight for the first time. We had a great discussion last week and hope that those of you who were not able to be there will be able to watch the recording when it becomes available. As I reflected on our discussion and the questions for this week, I could not help but feel a sense of sadness about the history we are learning about, and particularly in light of what is going on in the world today. I know that many of you share my sadness. It was reflected in some of your comments last week, and I just want to acknowledge that and remind you to be gentle with yourselves and with each other. Since we do have newcomers this week, I am going to restate our norms. They're simple. Allow yourself to be open and vulnerable. Listen to others non-judgmentally, and allow others to share if you already have, and try to keep your sharing succinct. Before I introduce Rebecca, who will be facilitating tonight's session, I would like to read our land acknowledgement. For millennia, the Kumeyaay people have been part of this land. This land has nourished, healed, protected, and embraced them for many generations in a relationship of harmony and balance. As members of the San Diego community, we acknowledge this legacy. We find inspiration from the land of the Kumeyaay. Our facilitator tonight is Dr. Rebecca Bartel Nunez. Did I pronounce that right? You were muted. She's on the vestry at St. Paul's in Point Loma, and All Souls. I don't know where I came up with that. All Souls in Point Loma, and is an associate professor of religious studies at San Diego State University. In this evening's format, it will be like last week. For those of you who were with us last week, we will have Rebecca will give a summary opening. We will do a group discussion of chapter 2, and then we will break into small groups to talk about the questions that she posed in chapter 3. So Rebecca, take it away.
Thank you, Julie, Diane, everyone who's working behind the scenes to bring us all together here. Before I begin, I want to invite us all to just sort of draw our attention to this place, let the worries and excesses and concerns and events of the day fade away as we all focus on this time together for the next little bit. So just take a breath, make sure your phones are on mute, and let's be here together in this space in love and radical generosity. So in this chapter, we're introduced to the beloved Celtic saint, Bridget of Kildare, a symbol of balance and in-betweenness, of the divine feminine and a deep universal hospitality. Legend and lore tell us that Bridget was perhaps the midwife and the wet nurse of the Christ child. In the Celtic tradition, Bridget is the saint of liminal spaces and times, she who appears in the dusk and at the dawn, she who serves as a portal between worlds and dimensions. In this chapter, we're led through 4 thresholds to get to know her. The doorway between pre-Christian and Christian ritual, belief, and practice, the portal between the divine and the worldly, the relationship between humanity and the earth, and the space between the womb of the universe and what is to come, the divine midwife. I'll reflect briefly on each of these 4 thresholds now before we move into a group discussion. First, Bridget is a portal that connects worlds like the pre-Christian Celtic world and the Christian world. Bridget invites us to appreciate and find wisdom beyond the bounds and borders of our own times, traditions, cultures, and nations. Bridget represents continuity and epochs of knowing and connecting with the divine. Bridget's name is the same as that of the Celtic earth goddess and is rooted in the Sanskrit word for brightness, light. Bridget is honored through the eternal sacred fire that burned in the hearths of Celtic homes and still does in some places of ancient and contemporary wisdom today. Bridget invites us to embrace and feel embraced by the arms of the divine feminine, like a mother rocking her baby or a mother hen gathering and protecting her chicks. God can be mother. Second, Bridget represents the space between divine and human worlds. She reminds us that we, like Christ, hold within us the intermingling spark that ignites when we recall our divine essence in relationship with our humanity. Bridget invites us to seek out the divine in all peoples and places we engage with, especially in the stranger, the foreigner, and those who are radically different than we in radical acts of generosity. Third, Bridget is a bridge between humanity and the earth and is the saint of new life. She invites us to seek out that which is new, springing forth from the depths of humanity, as well as pay attention to the places that seem barren in our societies, our churches, and our relationships. What new life is gestating in our souls, collectively and individually? And finally, Bridget is the channel between the divine womb and the new life, which is birthing from the belly of the universe. Bridget aids in bringing new life into being. And we might consider how we also might midwife as a verb, that new time, that new thing that is happening now. So I had sent out some reflection questions earlier in the week, but upon reflection, we thought maybe we would start with the questions that were sent out today in the email that Diane sent us all to discuss here as a group. I think collectively, we certainly respond as you feel the spirit leading, but I do have some questions that might frame and shape our discussion for the next few minutes. So I know that Diane is putting those in the chat, but I'll just read them and speak them out loud. So the first is, I think we're living in a threshold moment. And so I'm interested to know how we all see this gestation of new life around us, if we can find the hope and the brightness amidst the darkness in this liminal space. How do we see the spirit of Bridget working in our lives and in the world, despite the darkness that seems to be all around? The second question I thought we could discuss is, how do we think that this constructed, forged, fabricated disconnect between humanity and the earth has contributed to environmental injustices? This divide between what is sacred and what is animate, what is an object, that Bridget invites us to sort of exist in that between space of finding the depth of the divine in all things, similar to what we will see in the third chapter. And then perhaps an open question of what other illuminations or questions did this chapter elicit in you? So I open it up for discussion, comments, dialogue.
And so if you could use your raise hand feature, at least on my computer, you'd find it under reactions. But if you can't find it or don't have it on your device, you can also just literally raise your hand if you want to talk.
We have Sydney, who's got her hand raised.
Good evening, all. I hope everyone had a good day today. Weather was beautiful. In fact, we can actually attribute that to how St. Brigitte looked at nature and all that. That today's weather was absolutely gorgeous. The shining brightness of that wonderful illuminating sun that God created for us. And in answering and thinking about the first question emailed today, life is all around us. It's in the air, it's in the water, it's even in the plants beginning their spring awakening. And St. Brigitte, she honored the world that we live in, taking from the Celtic pre-Christian era of honoring the space that you exist in. She stepped lightly on the ground, and I don't mean she walked quietly, I mean she didn't impact the earth tremendously with her presence being there. She respected it. She honored it. She honored the fact that God created nature first and then man to care for nature. That's a funny one. She took that seriously as a matter of, as what's learned from the culture she grew up in and the faith that she embraced. And she saw the connection between the Mother Earth and our fatherly heaven. She knew they were one and the same, and it was her destiny to care for that which he created. As for the disconnect between now and then and her, I think it was forged by the arrogant thought in the parts of the early church, and I'm not saying everyone, that nature was created for us, for humans. So therefore, it was expected to work for us, not us for them. And in the race for the control, the leaders of the early church, they subjugated the earth to man. In other words, man was supposed to do everything. The earth was supposed to do for man. And as far as having it today, there is some thought that since God will create a new earth, there is no need to care for this one because it's going to be destroyed. So you can exploit it all you want. It doesn't matter because we're going to get a new one. And that's my thought on the first two questions.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Am I ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Since I taught Latin for 25 years, can everyone hear me? Yes? Okay. I thought I would note that liminal is indeed a threshold, a beginning even. And it's limen, liminis, a neuter noun in Latin. And there is always the threshold between folk wisdom and institutional religion is always porous, always exists in every culture. And I bring to mind the two parts of my family that are indigenously connected to. One is my husband's family that came to Bethlehem in the 12th century and has lived there ever since as Roman Catholics and Greek Orthodox. The other is my son-in-law, whose family came from Saudi Arabia in the 8th century and has lived in Hebron, of course, where the tomb of Abraham is, continuously since the 7th century. Those two, the way the Muslims, Sunni Muslims practice in Hebron and the way the Christian Bethlehemites practice Christianity and Greek Orthodox is effectively they're a product of the land in which they live and the faith which they were given. I won't talk right now about the research I did on the Nativity Church, but it was telling as well. The second point I'd like to talk about is the Scottish artist John Duncan. Have you looked at his picture? It's wonderful. It's exceptional. It has that decorative quality that Celtic art does. It's very moving. I would like to point out again that everyone is blonde. And my husband's family and my son-in-law's family some of them are blonde, very much like my granddaughter's blonde, and some have red hair and some have black hair. So there's a mixture of colors, and that it isn't just one ethnicity. And I also want to talk about the painting, how it reflects the seals, the air. It is, as Newell says, the imagination of the Celts that St. Bridget came to the Holy Land. And it's a wonderful imagination, and it gives a tactile quality to the story of St. Bridget. But you must understand, Jesus was born in a cave. He wasn't born, there was no wood to build a cattle barn, but that doesn't make any difference. The cave that we revere in Bethlehem as the cave of the Nativity, who knows, but it was a cave, and it was underground. And that's why the Palestinians stress so much the light of God that cannot be extinguished.
Thanks, Jane. So Anita has her hand up.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I was really drawn to the word thresholds, and on page 65 in the book, it talks about in this moment, politically, culturally, and religiously, we are witnessing the death throes of a shadow form of masculine power that has arrayed itself over against the earth, the sacred feminine, and non-white bodies. This shadow form of power, however, has no ultimate future. It is essentially false in its betrayal of the sacred that is in everyone. So in fear, it is lashing out with unprecedented force, but it is not the deep spirit of this moment in time. Something else is trying to be born. So there's total resistance against trying to establish justice in our society for everyone, but it's going to be born in spite of the resistance. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Nancy Peterson, there's several Nancys that has her hand up.
So thinking about that this is a threshold moment in our world. And I think that what's going on in the Ukraine right now is one of those moments. And I think that the feminine spirit of collaboration of all these other countries coming together is at work. And the, also the feminine spirit of resistance, in the Ukrainian people, trying to rise up against this real, I would say real male energy, this aggressor, so yeah, I think that we're living in that time, and I hope that the feminine energy in this world does bring us more into balance, instead of this this world that we live in right now. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope that you're right.
Oh.
Barbara.
Yes, I'm kind of answering the first question about the threshold moment that we're in. We're in the season of Lent, and it happens to be one of my favorite seasons of the church. I know it sounds weird, but it is. But this is a very gestational type of time, and it's like seeds growing underground. It's a time of inward growth and introspection and study and searching and growing inwardly. And pretty soon there will be spring, and there'll be a quickening, and there will be outgrowth. But I think we're in that transitional, that threshold moment right now. And I think it's a really kind of a wonderful thing. That's it.
Julie, you're muted again.
I guess here after I said something about making sure you were unmuted, I keep doing it. I guess I'll just leave it, leave it unmuted. So I don't see any hands right at the moment. I don't know, Rebecca, do you want to guide us in any way? Is there something-
I was wondering, thank you everyone for having shared. The second question really is concerned specifically with how this divide between the earth and the spiritual world, the material world and the physical world, and the spiritual world has affected the way in which we interact and are in relationship with nature. And the environment around us, since we're really focusing on this question of environmental justice and sacred creation. So I wonder if there are any specific thoughts on that element of what Saint Bridget invites us to think about.
Anybody? Did I see hands?
I think Anne Kelly just raised her hand, and Richard Leaf and Carolyn Leaf.
I think with that one, even just today, something came up in my news feed about that redlining causes people who are affected by it to have like really terrible air quality, which leads to so many health problems. And then I think that when we see the impact of greed and racism and power hunger causing these impacts on the earth, the people who always suffer the most are going to be the people at the lowest end of the scale in terms of the power structure. And I think that as Christians, we're really called upon to really address that and really engage in whatever way we can to think about the human rights of everybody. That as I think one of the things that I really loved from the reading was, and I had a few things I didn't love about it, but I'll spare you. The idea of the feminine being eminent, with the eminence being that all of that spirit of God is within something. You don't have to look outside of it. It's all within. And then the idea of the more masculine viewpoint, which really, I think the schism in the church going toward that transcendent, where everything is outside and it's super big and super out there and super to be sought, but it's not present. And it just, that really kind of struck me. The idea that it's all already there. It's already in us. And that if we can connect to that, that bit of God and that bit of God's love that is in all things, then maybe we can love ourselves more and feel to respect and honor our own selves. And that maybe sometimes that's how it needs to start, is a real connection within that we can then live to help balance the world more.
Thank you. That was great. So we just have a couple more minutes before we go on to chapter 3. I know this is like a super flyover of chapter 2. We could probably spend an entire semester on Bridget, but Richard and then Carolyn, if you want to talk, and then we'll turn it back over to Rebecca for introducing the next chapter.
Yeah, the word that just comes to my mind is focus. And we live in a very busy world, we all know that. And if we could somehow focus on the beauty of the heavens at night, if we could focus on the beauty of the ocean that's close by, maybe we get a different perspective, a more feminine perspective, if you will. And the other thing is, in terms of focus, is that we were giving ashes away in the public square. And we had this wonderful conversation with a man in a wheelchair who was homeless. And I'm sorry that we had to break that off, because it's just being with him was a special moment. It's more, rather than looking down on someone who's disabled, but rather what wisdom can he give in the feminine kind of way. enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Carolyn, you know,
Okay,
wrap this all up?
This will be quick. I probably don't even need to say this. I mean, it's just so usual or whatever for the male side to be power from the top down, and the feminine to be nurturing. This isn't always the case. I might point to my husband, who is always trying to get things together. He would put our rabbit and our cat up on a shelf outside, and he would try to get them to be friends. And he tries to get that to happen with lots of people. So he breaks that mold a little bit, but the tendency is for the power down has just, we've just forgotten that there's another side, I think, because we haven't had a chance to listen to another side. Thanks.
Thank you. We've lost the ability to listen to it, it seems.
Yeah.
So Rebecca, do you want to introduce chapter 3? And then I think Diane's going to put us in breakout rooms.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for engaging in that discussion about chapter 2. Of course, there's so much more to say, and I do think there are probably many more energies than just male and feminine in the universe. So there's all kinds of in between, as St. Birgit might invite us to think about also. So chapter 3 is about sacred flow, and we're introduced to John Scotus Eriugena. I think I'm saying that correctly. Eriu coming from meaning Irish born, Gena from genus. So I'm just going to refer to him as John. He invites us to recognize the sacred flow of the divine in everything. Bertrand Russell, and I got this from Wikipedia, dubbed him, quote, the most astonishing person of the 9th century, end quote. And the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy states that he is, quote, the most significant Irish intellectual of the early monastic period, end quote. So this is a significant person. The chapter calls us to urgently reconcile the spiritual and the physical realms if we are to save ourselves from the collapse of our planetary existence. John was a wandering scholar who resisted the hegemony of the imperial Roman Church, and he invites us to consider the light of the divine as a flowing river and to see God in the flow of all things. For John, every life form reveals God, but we humans are forgetful creatures and must be reminded to cultivate a recognition of the sacred in all things. John invites us to recognize the need to reconcile grace and nature, to find the immanence in the elemental energies of the stars, the sun, the moon, the flashing of lightning, the wildness of wind, the depth of the seas, the fecundity of the earth, and the solidity of rocks. And that's from his prayer you can find on page 73. Similar to what was just being said by Richard. John rebukes the divide between grace and nature, explaining that the separation of the spiritual from the physical has resulted in the Western world's exploitation and abuse of nature. We might pause to consider how strategic campaigns to empty the physical world of its divine character has led us to justify practices like drilling into the earth to extract her deepest hidden treasures, like gold, oil, silver, coltan, or cutting down entire forests to overfarm cattle or plant monocultures like African palm or sugarcane, two crops that also relied on slave labor, yet another extension of the sin of dehumanizing and despiritualizing the other. This chapter tells of encounters between imperial Christianity and divine rebellion of Celtic leaders who challenged many aspects of the Augustinian dogmas that were to be implemented. Central to the telling of these stories is also reflection on the different ways that Celtic and Roman Christianity interpreted and thought about sexuality and desire. For the Celts, sexual union between committed partners was good and even sacred outside of the clergy. For the Roman Church, as we know, sexuality was confused, as the author tells us, repressed, and because of the separation of grace from nature, spirituality from material and physical life, sex was seen as defilement by many, and especially female sexuality, as it was tied to the earth and therefore something to be tamed and domesticated, and even at times unclean. John Scotus embodied the independence and resistance of Celtic Christianity, as he was a wandering scholar and a teacher who taught about the essence of the sacred in all things. How radically different this idea is to the dominant idea of the scales of sacrality, different levels of what is more and less sacred, or the very brutal severing of the ties that bind the spiritual and the physical world. So now we'll move into our group discussion, and we've got a few questions here for you to consider in your groups or anything else that might come up in your conversation. Yes, Diane.
And I apologize, I put the wrong questions in. I'm not sure exactly how that happened. So Rebecca, could you does anybody have access to those questions?
I've got them here.
Okay,
Yeah,
if you would. I think I went to put them in and then I lost them in the place I had them. So
Yeah,
if that makes
here they
any
are.
sense. I don't know. Thank you.
So the first
Actually-
question, sorry?
Oh, never mind. They're here. Go ahead.
The first question is, how can we better read the small book together with the big book? Remember, John speaks of the small book of the Christian scriptures, the Bible, and the big book of the living text of the universe. And how would that change the way we interpret the Bible and live with nature if we were to read both of these texts, nature as text and the scriptures as text together? Then we can discuss what are the consequences of denying the sacred within ourselves. And I can't remember who was speaking to that point just a few minutes ago, to the importance of recognizing, I think it was Anne Kelly. And then thirdly, how can the concept of grace impact our reconciliation with the earth and our work for environmental justice? So those are just some questions to guide conversation if anything else comes up, of course. And I think we are inviting someone in each group to,
Yes, we are.
to take some notes, and then when we come back to our group, people can share what they spoke about in their small groups as they feel like it contributes to the conversation.
And if I could just say there's a lead person in each room, so they will know what to ask and I'll ask you to volunteer for it. Thank you. I've been having trouble with the breakout rooms. I had to totally create them, which was interesting. Okay, so everybody have fun.
We were speculating on how hard it might be for some women priests to preach from the Bible, given that it's such a male-oriented book. And then the other interesting comment about the book was that although there are certainly some, nature descriptions in it, there is some talk of the natural world. It's written in a language that gives man dominion over the earth, which is what has caused us to, I think, not to damage our earth. It's there to serve us. And then, but at the end, we had some very positive thinking that we shouldn't be so caught up in the darkness that's not giving God enough credit. This threshold we're in is going to be newer and better and greater. And we even had an idea of how that might work. So Richard, I think your hand is up.
Yes, from number 8, but I didn't take very good notes. I was scribbling and I can't interpret my own notes, but I do have a reflection in a late Christian Century magazine that came out about a week ago. On the cover is a Professor Godfrey, and she is definitely a feminist But in terms of what she's doing is she's writing a new what should I say, lectionary. That's the word I'm looking for. And the lectionary has everything that refers to women. That the lectionary is more oriented towards women than it is towards men, as a antidote, if you will, to the present lectionary, maybe emphasizing men more than they should. So there's something going on that's very, very positive. I'll be interested to see that lectionary and how we might do something about it at the cathedral. Who knows?
Thank you, Richard. And Susan.
One under question number 3 and the concept of grace and environmental justice. We talked about how we are created to care for the world and not exploit it, that we have a gift of well-being, but sometimes we crowd that gift of well-being up with things like addictions, and we try to fill the hole up with things that are not part of the concept of grace. One person gave us a challenge to get out into the outside and look at the stars and the sunset. And one person talked about the labyrinth, the worship via the labyrinth. That seems to be something in the Celtic tradition that's new and interesting.
Okay, thank you. So I don't see any more hands, and I think Diane, you're muted.
Akiko, I think, has her hand up.
Okay, thank you. I didn't see that. That's why we need 2 people watching the screen. Akiko.
So we were group 1, and our big book and small group conversation covered some of the same points that have already been spoken about. So I won't expand too much on that, but we did talk about how that we should consider the big book when we're interpreting the small book, that the big book inspires us to care for the earth, and the small book can be interpreted as permission to exploit the earth, but there are other interpretations, and that we should take the big book into consideration as we're interpreting. And then we also noted that there were a lot of similarities between how the Celtic view of the treatment of the earth and the indigenous view. And then in terms of not seeing the sacred in ourselves, and when we don't see it in ourselves, we don't see it in others, and then other people. And so it really has to start from within, and there's so much damage that occurs when you can't see that sacredness in yourself. And then on page 90, there's a quote that says, "Grace is the gift of well-being, given not to change the heart of our nature, but to release the true heart of our nature." And we talked about how in the context of that quote, that grace has to do with helping everyone to thrive, not just people, but the entire earth, and people of color and lower social economic status.
Okay, thank you. Looks like we all had really good conversations in our small group, and appreciate all the people that reported back.
And
now.
I know that Susan has her hand up, but Susan, we're really short of time. And so I hope you will hold that or put it in the chat. I apologize.
Okay, so we're moving towards wrapping up. Susan, please do share your thoughts in the chat. If anyone else wants to add things in the chat. And like we did in our first session, we want to close this space with a meditation. And so I invite you all to get comfortable, take a deep breath, perhaps close your eyes. And I'm going to lead you through some words of awareness that we find at the end of chapter 2. I'll let you know when we can open, to invite you to open your eyes again. Saint Bridget embodies the beauty and strength of the sacred feminine, which is deep within us all. Stories of her life call forth this dimension of the divine in us, that we may be strong again to serve the interrelationship of all things within us, between us, and among us in the world. So keeping your eyes closed, rest in contemplative awareness for a few minutes to reflect on the ways in which this wisdom might apply to your lives.